University of California Regents postponed a proposal that would bar professors and staff from posting their personal views on prominent campus web pages. Now, political statements are currently allowed on campuses as long as they don't comment on electoral politics. The San Francisco Chronicle says that the California Regents chair said, quote, "When you show taxpayers what's going on, what they see on university websites, a lot of people are quite offended. It's fine to have opinions, but we are trying to welcome students and have a safe and open community." Now, the homepage of the Critical Race and Ethnic Studies Department at UC Santa Cruz writes, "Israel's bombing of Gaza is genocidal." Similar statements appear on the Ethnic Studies Department websites of UC San Diego. Now, in the new proposal, such statements would be considered political and be prohibited.
The effort to create such proposals began in 2022, but has escalated since campus tensions exploded over the October 7th attack. In January this year, more than 400 UC faculty members signed a letter published in the Jewish Journal objecting to the faculty using UC websites to promote political propaganda and activism. It was the second time this year that the Regents punted the vote. In a two-day meeting at UCLA, they unanimously agreed to take up the matter again in May and redefine it in the interim. Here's my initial read on this. The application of this is going to be uneven, and it's going to end up being a problem. If they say that they've been talking about this since 2022, but it's now ramped up, admittedly, in the wake of October 7th, it does feel like the trajectory we've seen in college campuses has been to want to repress pro-Palestinian speech, characterize said speech as anti-Semitic, even when it's not, and to characterize statements that are largely in line with humanitarian opinion. Like, these are genocidal statements, even if the ICJ hasn't yet made a determination as to whether or not a genocide is taking place, as completely out of bounds and not rooted in fact, in a way that I think statements like Russia's invasion of Ukraine is genocidal have never been met with the same kind of pushback. Whether or not it's true, I'm just making an assessment of the interest in policing the language in different political contexts.
But shouldn't we then just say, I mean, I have no, obviously professors can make political statements, should be able to, students, student groups, et cetera. That's clearly First Amendment territory. The university itself, the department, maybe just no political statements whatsoever. That seems fine to me, as long as is actually evenly enforced. In that way, departments don't need to decide whether we weigh on, is this significant enough? Is this, like, it's,
but that's
just
but
don't
that's
make
the
a statement
problem.
At all.
Is someone going to police a administrator or professor, whomever, who writes on the website on October 8th, "We condemn this horrible terrorist act of Hamas against Israel"? That is also a political statement, right?
Agreed. I think it's better if they just don't make those statements at all. Why do they need to? Who cares?
Yeah, I mean,
I think that would be better.
I think that there's an argument for that, largely, in part because I do think it's a little self-preserving in some respects, that because of the way that these left liberal disciplines on university campuses have been targeted by the right, frankly, keeping some of that stuff out of the public purview protects the department. Don't give, kind of easy opportunities for the right to dunk and then get your public funding retracted. But I have concerns about this regardless, because I'm confident, given the trajectory that we've seen so far, that there is going to be an asymmetric application of this rule. So in the New York Times' coverage of this, they point out that some universities have already tightened their rules. Universities have canceled or postponed speakers, tried to censor Israelism, which is a documentary that is critical of Israel, and suspended groups like Students for Justice in Palestine. Very notably, all of those are cutting in one direction, against pro-Palestinian students. And including Jewish students who were the victims of that chemical attack at Columbia some months ago that we talked about last week with Prim Tucker. So is a rule like this going to actually be evenly distributed, or is it going to be used to say that it is a political statement to say something like Palestinian liberation is a good thing?
Just no statements that are not germane to the department and the universe. Like it
is germane to part of what is discussed in this Times piece is that there's in Islamic Studies department or something like that, that it might be very well relevant to. There might be entire classes devoted to talking about, in a semester or two, what's been going on in Gaza. There are existing classes, I'm sure, that are talking about the multi-decade history of the conflict between Israel and Palestine. So, the idea that there are these neat dividing lines between what's relevant and what's not. You have a racial studies and ethnic studies department that isn't going to weigh in some ways about something like Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and not be addressing it.
The professors can address it. They can teach what they want in their class. It's just the university website doesn't need to put out a statement. It's very easy not to make a statement for the university website, right?
I mean, again, it might be easy, but it wasn't easy for people not to put out their statements condemning the attack on October 7th. So we'll see how this plays out. I do think that statements are different from classes and the substance of classes and the
I mean, Frank, I have to. Well, go ahead.
The topic of classes, but go ahead.
I was just say, I mean, frankly, I have seen on the other side. I have seen conservatives or more pro-Israel or supportive Israel people complaining that there were not enough statements in the wake of October 7th, given that universities and departments weigh in on so many political issues, like, oh, you condemned this and this and this, but you couldn't bother to condemn the attacks on October 7th. That was a perspective that existed. Again, I just think they should not need to make statements at all. They can make a statement congratulating their football team when they win the game. That kind of thing seems germane to the university. I don't know why we need political statements from them all, given that they seem to make everyone really mad.
What happens if the ICJ comes back with a statement saying that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza?
What about it? Why does the university need to weigh in? Again, a professor who's a scholar of humanitarian law or that kind of thing can say it in their own. They can even say it in their professional capacity,
I think
right?
that's fair.
Just don't need to write it on the university website.
I think that's fair. It's interesting.
And then someone or a professor who similarly and disagrees with that is allowed to speak up and should not suffer any consequences. And you can have a debate about it. And we want more speech. It's whether the university itself, which is not a person.
This is really a conversation about the value of solidarity statements in a university context, and they have been described as having value, as students feeling the need, a desire to know whether or not their administration, whether the institution is supportive of various cultural trends because their failure to be in support or what have you is perceived as, it doesn't make them feel safe. This is a safe environment, that kind of a thing. And I would argue that the post-October 7th landscape really illustrates that the statements are much less important than whether or not the university is, in fact, censoring the ability to play a video that's critical of Israel on campus, or kicking out, or whatever you call it, canceling I'm trying to avoid the word cancel, but canceling your political group asymmetrically, not canceling any pro-Israel groups, but canceling pro-Palestine groups, because in the instance of at Columbia, they held an unsanctioned event on a lawn. I mean, we have so many instances of evidence of being actually treated differently because of your political actions and beliefs that go so much more to the core of what's happening than I think these solidarity statements. But they do at this point seem beside the point. So I agree with you, except for that I suspect we're still going to get solidarity statements, and that they're going to be asymmetrically applied.
Free speech. I mean, I'm not saying it's not asymmetrical. I don't know. I haven't tallied it all up. I have found examples, and I've talked about some of them, of pro-Israeli, there's at least 2 or 3 professors who were investigated or shamed. There was the one guy who, I can't remember what institution it was.
Was it the Columbia professor? Because he was doxing students.
No, it was a guy who had an interaction in public, and he was on video feuding with students about Israel and Hamas, and they told him he couldn't teach his class anymore pending an investigation.
I just don't. I'm not denying. I just don't remember that.
But I spoke for the Students for Justice in Palestine when those Florida groups I did a whole radar on how I thought that was not consistent with the First Amendment, even though I do not agree with those groups at all, and I find their statement about October 7th morally repugnant. They nevertheless have the right to organize and engage in free speech on campus, so I don't agree with dealing with those policies in any such way.
Yeah, the professor I was referring to at Columbia is Shai David. I went to go read about it, but, the people who are covering the investigation, which was pretty delayed, are all very pro-Israel outlets like the New York Post, who frames it as Columbia professor Shai David, who called out rampant anti-Semitism, is being investigated. The National Review says Columbia professor who spoke out against anti-Semitism, as though he's being investigated for speaking out against anti-Semitism. No, it's about him endorsing, putting pictures of students on trucks and saying that they shouldn't be hired, and co-signing people like the CEO of Sweetgreen, who went onto Twitter and said things like there should be a blacklist of Columbia students who have been members of Students for Justice in Palestine, even if they didn't even participate personally in any given action.
Allowed to say that. I don't think you should be punished for saying that.
No, whether a professor is endorsing punishing students, I think has a pretty direct implication for whether or not they can teach a student in their classroom. Does a student want to go into a classroom where they think if they have the wrong point of view, their teacher is going to try to get them blacklisted and unemployed for the rest of their lives?
The professor I was talking about was John Strauss at University of Southern California, who was in a caught in a viral moment where it was made to sound that he was accused of saying kill all Palestinians when he was clearly saying kill all Hamas, and then he was investigated for that. But we will continue
What was the outcome of the investigation?
I don't know. I'll have to look at an update. But he was prevented from teaching his class for a while. More Rising right after this.